Arthur Penhaligon lived a quiet life on the edge of Oakhaven, a town that felt less like a place on a map and more like a forgotten corner of the world. He was a man built from sturdy, unassuming timber, aged like a good oak, his face a roadmap of sun and time. Most folks in town saw him as just that, old Arthur, the quiet fellow with the beat-up Ford F-150, vintage late 80s, parked reliably in his driveway. It wasn't much to look at, faded blue paint, a few rust spots blooming like unwelcome flowers, but it ran, and it was his. He spent his days tending a small garden, reading worn paperbacks on his porch swing, and making the occasional trip into town for supplies. His routine was a peaceful rhythm, a slow waltz with solitude that he had cultivated over many years. It was a peace he had earned, paid for in ways the residents of Oakhaven could never imagine. They saw a retiree. They didn't see the coiled steel beneath the unassuming exterior, the ghost of a man who had walked through fire and come out the other side, not unscathed, but unbroken. His eyes, behind thin-rimmed glasses, held a depth that spoke of distant horizons and hard-won wisdom. He moved with a quiet efficiency, every motion economical, a subtle grace that hinted at a past demanding precision and discipline. Oakhaven had its share of shadows, a low-grade thrum of unease that had settled over the town like a persistent fog. Lately, it seemed to emanate from a group of teenagers, loud and arrogant, who congregated near the abandoned mill on the edge of town. They wore matching jackets, spoke in clipped, aggressive tones, and had a way of looking at people that made the air feel cold. They weren't just kids being rebellious, there was a predatory edge to them, a sense of entitlement backed by something unseen but felt. Small acts of vandalism had become more frequent, spray paint on walls, broken windows, intimidation of younger kids. The police seemed overwhelmed, or perhaps, Arthur suspected, unwilling to stir the pot too much. Fear was a currency in Oakhaven now, and these teenagers were its petty distributors, testing the boundaries, pushing just enough to gauge resistance. Arthur had seen their type before, on different streets, in different countries, wearing different uniforms. The details changed, but the core remained the same: power through intimidation, a pack mentality preying on weakness. One stifling afternoon, Arthur drove his old Ford into town to pick up a new bag of soil. He parked it carefully on Main Street, the engine ticking as it cooled. When he came out of the hardware store 10 minutes later, his quiet world collided violently with the growing shadow over Oakhaven. 3 of the teenagers stood near his truck. The tallest, a kid with a cruel smirk, was dragging a key along the driver's side door, leaving a deep, jagged scar in the faded blue paint. Another was kicking the tires, laughing. The third was spraying bright orange paint across the hood, right over the Ford emblem. They didn't notice Arthur at first. Their focus was entirely on their act of petty destruction, lost in their own small world of rebellion and disrespect. Arthur stopped dead on the sidewalk. A stillness fell over him, a quiet that was far more unnerving than any shout. The mundane act of vandalism against his simple, old truck cut through his cultivated peace like broken glass. It wasn't just the damage, it was the sheer, casual disregard for another person's property, the open contempt for something old and unpretentious. It was the symbol of the creeping decay they represented. He took a slow breath, the air suddenly thick with suppressed energy. The world narrowed to the 3 figures and the scarred metal of his truck. He walked towards them, his steps slow and deliberate. The scraping sound of the key stopped. The laughter died. They turned, startled, then their expressions shifted to defiance, quickly masking surprise. The kid with the key held it loosely in his hand, a glint of malice in his eyes. The one with the spray can lowered it, gripping it like a weapon. The third stopped kicking, his stance defensive. "That's my truck," Arthur said, his voice low, lacking any tremor of age or fear. It wasn't a question, or even really an accusation. It was a simple statement of fact, delivered with an unnerving calmness that caught the teenagers off guard. The tall kid with the key recovered first. He smirked again, a challenge. "Yeah? So what, old man?" The one with the paint can snickered. Gonna cry about it? Arthur didn't react to the insults. His gaze swept over the damage, then settled on the kid with the key. You scratched it. Deep. The kid puffed out his chest. So? Get a new one. Or what? You gonna do something? He took a step forward, hand tightening on the key. His friends flanked him, trying to look tough. They saw an old man in faded jeans and a plain shirt, an easy target. They were blind to the stillness in his eyes, the almost imperceptible tension in his shoulders. Doing something, Arthur said, his voice dropping just slightly, becoming resonant in a way that made the air vibrate, depends on what you think is going to happen next. His gaze, direct and unwavering, held the tall kid's. There was no anger in it, only a profound, weary certainty that unsettled the teenager more than any rage could have. The kid faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of unease crossing his face before the bravado slammed back into place. What's gonna happen, the kid sneered, trying to regain control, is you're gonna walk away. Unless you wanna end up worse than that piece of junk truck, he gestured with the key, a clear threat. Arthur took another slow breath. He looked at the kid's hand, the key, the arrogant posture. He took one step closer. That truck has earned its scars, son. Like its owner. The kid lunged, a wild, untrained swing with the hand holding the key, aiming for Arthur's face. It was a street fight move, fast but telegraphed. Arthur moved. Not fast, not flashy, but with a speed born of timing and efficiency honed over decades. His left hand shot out, not to block, but to control. He grabbed the kid's wrist, his grip like iron. The kid cried out, surprised by the strength. Before the others could react, Arthur pivoted, using the kid's momentum against him. He didn't hit him. He didn't throw him. He applied a small, precise pressure point on the kid's wrist and elbow while guiding his body. The kid suddenly found himself off balance, stumbling, then kneeling painfully on the asphalt, his own arm twisted at an awkward angle behind him, the key falling from his numb fingers. He gasped, unable to move. The other two froze, eyes wide with shock. They had never seen anyone move like that, especially not an old man. Arthur didn't look at them. His focus remained entirely on the kneeling boy. Disrespect, Arthur said softly, applying just enough pressure to make the boy wince, earns consequences. He held the boy there for another moment, the silence punctuated only by the kid's ragged breathing and the distant sound of traffic. The boy's bravado had evaporated, replaced by fear and pain. Then, just as suddenly, Arthur released the wrist. The kid scrambled backward on his knees, clutching his arm, eyes wide with terror. The other two hesitated, looking from their fallen friend to the unervingly calm old man. The kid on the ground whimpered. "Get out of here," Arthur said, his voice back to its normal tone, but with an edge of finality. "And tell whoever sent you, or whoever you think you answer to, that this stops now." The teenagers didn't need telling twice. They helped their friend up, casting terrified, resentful glances at Arthur, and scrambled away, disappearing around the corner. Arthur watched them go, his posture relaxed once more, though the stillness remained in his eyes. He looked down at the key lying on the ground, then back at the deep scratch on his truck door. The orange paint felt like a stain on the quiet life he had built. This wasn't just vandalism anymore. It was a line crossed. Word travels fast in a small town, especially when it involves the mayor's nephew getting manhandled by an old man everyone thought was harmless. Yes, the tall kid with the key was Michael, the nephew of Mayor Thompson, a man known more for his blustering speeches and backroom deals than for actual governance. The teenagers, it turned out, were part of a loose-knit group that did the local gang's dirty work, a gang run by a man named Rex. Rex wasn't from Oakhaven, but he had established a foothold, using intimidation and exploiting the town's quiet nature to run drugs and extort local businesses. Michael and his crew were his eager, foolish foot soldiers. The evening after the truck incident, a patrol car pulled up to Arthur's house. A young deputy, Peterson, stepped out, looking uncomfortable. Arthur met him on the porch. "Mr. Penhaligon?" "I'm Deputy Peterson. Got a report about an altercation on Main Street today." Arthur nodded. "Vandalism. 3 boys damaged my truck. I apprehended one of them briefly." Peterson shifted his weight. "Yeah, well, one of the boys filed a complaint. Said you assaulted him." "Michael Thompson." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Michael Thompson scratched my truck with a key, kicked the tires, and spray-painted it. His friends were complicit. I stopped him from running, applied minimum necessary force to ensure he couldn't hurt me or escape until I'd delivered a message. No lasting injury." "Right, well, Mayor Thompson is very concerned." Peterson wouldn't meet Arthur's eye. "He's requesting you come down to the station to give a statement." "A statement?" "I gave a statement to the boys. And to their associates, through them." Arthur's voice was polite, but the underlying steel was evident. "Is the mayor filing charges for the vandalism?" Peterson looked even more uncomfortable. "Ah, well, the mayor feels. Given the circumstances, maybe we can resolve this without charges on either side. Just a talk." "Circumstances," Arthur repeated flatly. "The circumstance is his nephew committed a crime and then lied about the consequence." "Mr. Penhaligon, I'm just doing my job," Peterson said, clearly wanting this to be over. "The mayor wants you to come in. Says he wants to smooth things over." Arthur looked at the deputy, a flicker of something akin to pity in his eyes. Peterson was a good kid, trying to be a good cop in a town where the lines were increasingly blurred. "Deputy, you tell Mayor Thompson that if he wants to talk about resolving this, he can come here. And he should bring his nephew. Along with an apology and compensation for my truck. Otherwise, I'll handle it my way." Peterson swallowed hard. I'll deliver the message, Mr. Penhaligon." As Peterson's car pulled away, Arthur knew he had just escalated the situation. He hadn't sought this, but he wouldn't back down. Peace was one thing, but allowing blatant injustice and intimidation to stand was another entirely. His quiet life was over, at least for now. He went inside and pulled out a worn address book, its pages filled with names and numbers from a different life. It was time to call in a few favors. The call to his old friend, Sam "Sarge" Johnson, was brief and to the point. Sam ran a motorcycle repair shop a few states over, a front for a group of veterans who, like Arthur, had found civilian life too quiet, too lacking in purpose, or too frustrating in its everyday injustices. They called themselves the Wrenchmen, a nod to their garage front, but their skills extended far beyond fixing engines. Sam listened without interruption as Arthur described the town, the gang, the teenagers, and the truck. "Sounds like you got fleas, old friend," Sam said when Arthur finished. His voice was gravelly, like stones rolling in a drum. "Need an exterminator?" "Something like that, Sarge," Arthur replied. "They stepped on my quiet. On my truck. And they think they own this town." "Say no more," Sam rumbled. "Give us 2 days. We'll bring the tools." Meanwhile, Arthur started doing his own investigation. He walked through town, not in his usual slow amble, but with a purpose. He noticed things others missed, the way certain businesses seemed untouched by the casual vandalism affecting others, the expensive cars parked discreetly behind the abandoned mill, the nervous glances people cast when the teenagers swaggered by. He talked to people he knew he could trust, like Maria, the owner of the local diner, whose son had been bullied, and Thomas, the gas station owner, a man who had served briefly in the reserves and still had a flicker of defiance in his eyes. "It's Rex," Thomas said one evening, leaning against a gas pump, keeping his voice low. "He moved in about 6 months ago. Started small, then just grew. Extortion, drugs, shaking down businesses. He's got about a dozen guys, plus those kids doing the dirty work. Even the police chief seems uninterested. And the mayor? Arthur asked. Thomas spat on the ground. Thompson. Rex owns him. Or has something on him. Michael and his friends? They're just trying to impress Rex, get into the real gang. Pathetic. Arthur nodded. It was a familiar pattern. Criminal elements exploiting weaknesses, using fear and corruption as their weapons. He saw the fear in Thomas's eyes, the resignation that had settled over the town. Have you thought about leaving? Arthur asked. Where would I go? Thomas sighed. This is home. Or it was. Before this. What if, Arthur said, looking Thomas directly in the eye, someone was willing to do something about it? Someone who knows how to deal with Rex's type. Thomas stared at him, sensing something behind Arthur's calm demeanor that he hadn't seen before. Who? People who understand what's at stake, Arthur replied. People who don't like bullies. The next morning, things escalated. Rex wasn't a man who took perceived slights lightly, especially one involving the mayor's nephew and disrupting his carefully cultivated atmosphere of fear. A black SUV, the kind Arthur had noted parked by the mill, sped down Arthur Street, screeched to a halt, and two burly men jumped out. They didn't bother with subtlety. They smashed the remaining windows on Arthur's truck, slashed the tires that hadn't been kicked, and took a baseball bat to the hood and fenders, leaving deep, ugly dents. Then they kicked over Arthur's porch swing and smashed his prize-winning tomato plants in the garden. It was a clear message: you mess with Rex, you lose everything. Arthur watched from his living room window, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. It wasn't the property damage that bothered him as much as the maliciousness, the deliberate destruction of his small attempts at peace and beauty. He felt a familiar, cold anger, an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel deeply in years. He wasn't just defending himself anymore, he was defending the quiet life they were trying to destroy, the peace they were trying to steal. He picked up his phone again. Sarge, he said, his voice hard. They broke my truck. And they messed with my tomatoes. A low growl came back. Say no more, Arthur. We're 10 miles out. We'll be there in 20-inch. As Arthur waited, he began to gather the few things he would need. Not weapons, not yet. Just his old duffel bag, a first aid kit, and a detailed map of Oakhaven he kept tacked to the wall, now marked with various points of interest: the mill, the few businesses Rex hadn't touched, potential choke points, escape routes. His mind, dormant in civilian life, began to click into place, assessing, analyzing, planning. 2 days later, 3 powerful motorcycles rumbled into Arthur's driveway, followed by a large, unmarked van. Sam Sarge Johnson, a bear of a man with a gray ponytail and arms like tree trunks, dismounted first. Behind him were 4 others, men and women with the same quiet strength and watchful eyes as Arthur. There was Javier, lean and quick, a former scout. Maria Rodriguez, a medic with a surprising knack for demolitions. Ben Carter, an expert in surveillance and electronics. And Silas, a towering figure whose specialty was simply described as heavy lifting. They carried duffel bags that looked heavier than clothes. They gathered in Arthur's living room, surveying the damage outside with grim expressions. Okay, Arthur, Sam said, his voice softer now. Walk us through it. What's the situation? Arthur unrolled his map on the coffee table. Rex controls the mill, he explained, pointing. That's his hub. Likely stores product and cash there. He's got maybe a dozen core guys, armed. Plus the local wannabes, maybe another 10, 15 total including the mayor's nephew. They operate through intimidation and violence. They've got the police chief compromised, and the mayor is either useless or complicit. Local support? Javier asked, his eyes scanning the map. Limited, but growing, Arthur replied. Thomas at the gas station, Maria at the diner, a few others I've spoken to. And Deputy Peterson, he's straight, but outranked and likely watched. So, Rex thinks he's king, Sam grunted. And you're the old man who smacked his prince. He escalated, Arthur said simply. He needs to understand that actions have consequences he hasn't accounted for. They spent the next few hours planning. It was like old times, the easy flow of tactical discussion, the shared understanding of risk and objective. Arthur wasn't just the leader, he was the strategist, combining his deep knowledge of the local area with his unparalleled experience. We can't hit the mill directly, not without causing a massive incident and potential civilian casualties if they run into town, Arthur explained. And we can't rely on the local police being clean. We need to dismantle his operation piece by piece, cut off his support, isolate him, and force him into a confrontation on our terms. Their plan was surgical. Hit Rex's assets, disrupt his operations, spread confusion, and erode his control, all while staying in the shadows. They would use speed, surprise, and their specialized skills to neutralize his key lieutenants and cripple his network before going after Rex himself. As they finalized the details, Sam looked at Arthur. You sure about this, Arthur? This isn't like overseas. This is home. Arthur looked out the window at his battered truck and the ruined garden. They came onto my property, Sarge. They attacked my peace. And they're choking the life out of this town. This is home. That's why we have to do it. Just as they were finishing their initial planning, a nervous knock came at the door. It was Deputy Peterson. He looked pale. Mr. Penhaligon, he whispered, glancing nervously at the formidable group behind Arthur. The mayor. He's making an announcement tomorrow morning. At the town hall. Says he's going to make an example of you. Press conference. He's bringing in sheriff's deputies from the next county over, ones he trusts. He's framing it as you attacking innocent teenagers and being a threat to public order. Arthur's eyes narrowed. Mayor Thompson wasn't just useless, he was actively collaborating, using his office to protect Rex's operation and target anyone who resisted. This was Rex's major move, using the veneer of official power to neutralize Arthur before he could strike. He's accelerating the timeline, Ben observed. Using the law against us. All right, Arthur said, turning back to the map, a new intensity in his eyes. Plan B. We adapt. We don't have time for a slow dismantle anymore. We hit them where they'll feel it most, force Rex's hand, and draw him out before the mayor can make his play. Tell us where you are watching from today. It's always inspiring to see where our stories reach around the globe. If you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. Tomorrow we have special story for you. The plan shifted. They would hit Rex's known drug distribution points simultaneously tonight. Create chaos, destroy product, show Rex that his reach wasn't as absolute as he thought. It was riskier, less controlled, but necessary now that the mayor was involved. Under the cloak of darkness, Arthur's team moved. They were ghosts, silent and efficient. Javier and Ben handled surveillance and disabling security systems. Maria and Silas were the muscle, breaching entry points and securing locations. Arthur, often with Sam or Javier, was the point man, entering first, neutralizing any resistance with swift, non-lethal force when possible, lethal only if absolutely necessary. Their first target was a seemingly innocent mechanic's shop downtown, a known drop point. Javier confirmed 2 lookouts and a couple of men inside. Okay, Arthur murmured into his comms. Javier, Ben, you take the lookouts. Non-lethal takedown. Maria, Silas, breach the back. Sam, with me through the front. Move. They flowed into position. A few sharp cracks over the comms indicated the lookouts were down. Silas used a hydraulic spreader on the back door, Maria slipped through the gap instantly. Arthur and Sam went through the front. The element of surprise was absolute. Inside, two men were counting bricks of what looked like cocaine. They went for their weapons, but Arthur and Sam were faster, cleaner. 5 minutes later, the men were tied up, the drugs were rendered unusable, Maria had a chemical agent that dissolved organic compounds, and the team was gone, leaving no trace except a lingering, acrid smell. They hit 2 more locations before dawn, disrupting distribution, destroying product, causing significant financial loss and sowing confusion among Rex's ranks. Each hit was precise, surgical, leaving the targets neutralized but not permanently harmed, a deliberate choice by Arthur. He wasn't here for a bloodbath, he was here to re-establish order and justice. As the sun rose, they were back at Arthur's house, tired but grimly satisfied. The battered truck in the driveway was a stark reminder of why they were doing this. News filtered in quickly. Rex was furious. His operation had taken a significant hit. He knew this wasn't random. This was a targeted attack by someone who knew what they were doing. He put the word out, find out who did this. He was ready to unleash his full force. The mayor's press conference was scheduled for late morning. Arthur knew Rex would be listening, perhaps even watching. This was their opportunity. Arthur called Deputy Peterson. "Deputy," he said. "I know about the press conference. I need you to do something for me. Something that will put your badge on the line, but it's the only way to fix this town." Peterson listened, his silence on the other end of the line heavy with conflict. Finally, he spoke, his voice tight. "What do you need, Mr. Penhaligon?" At that press conference, Arthur instructed, "When the mayor starts lying about me, you step forward. You tell the truth. You tell them his nephew committed vandalism, that the mayor covered it up, that Rex runs this town, and that the police chief is complicit. You call out Rex directly, challenge him. Tell the press Rex has information that could bring down the mayor and the chief." There was a long pause. "Mr. Penhaligon, they'll fire me. Or worse." "Maybe," Arthur said. "But you'll be doing the right thing. And you won't be alone. When you make that statement, things are going to get very hot for Rex. And we'll be ready." "Okay," Peterson said, his voice shaking slightly, but firm. "Okay. I'll do it." At the town hall, Mayor Thompson, looking pale and sweaty, stood before a handful of local reporters and concerned citizens. Police Chief Brody stood stiffly beside him, avoiding eye contact with anyone. "We're here today," Mayor Thompson began, clearing his throat nervously, "to address recent incidents of civil unrest caused by a Mr. Arthur Penhaligon, who attacked 3 of our town's young men without provocation after they accidentally damaged his vehicle. This kind of vigilantism cannot stand." Before he could continue, Deputy Peterson stepped forward from the small crowd of officers, pushing past Chief Brody. He stood tall, facing the reporters. His uniform looked crisp, his face determined. "That's not true," Peterson said, his voice clear and strong, amplified by the sudden silence. All eyes turned to him. Mayor Thompson sputtered. Chief Brody glared. "Deputy Peterson, what do you think you're doing?" Chief Brody hissed. "My job, Chief," Peterson said, not looking away from the cameras. "The truth is, Michael Thompson and 2 others deliberately vandalized Mr. Penhaligon's truck. Mr. Penhaligon defended himself and his property. Furthermore, Mayor Thompson and Chief Brody have been covering up the activities of a criminal gang led by a man named Rex, who has been extorting businesses and dealing drugs in Oakhaven." Chaos erupted. Reporters started shouting questions. Mayor Thompson's face turned bright red. Chief Brody lunged at Peterson. "And Rex," Peterson continued, raising his voice, ignoring the chief, "I know you're listening. You have leverage on the mayor and the chief. Proof of their corruption. Stuff that could put them away. Mr. Penhaligon knows it. He's coming for you, Rex. And he wants you to bring whatever leverage you have. Meet him at the abandoned mill. Tonight at midnight. You and your key players. Settle this. That was it. The gauntlet thrown. Rex, arrogant and enraged by the hits to his business and this public defiance, wouldn't be able to resist. This was his chance to reassert dominance, to crush the resistance led by the old man who had humiliated him. He would believe the mayor's proof was the target. Back at Arthur's, they monitored the news coverage. Peterson's gamble had paid off. The town was buzzing. The media was hounding the mayor and the chief. Rex was exposed, vulnerable. He'll take the bait, Arthur predicted. He won't trust anyone with that evidence now. He'll bring it himself, or what he thinks it is. He'll bring his best guys. And he'll expect a fight on his terms, probably an ambush around the mill. But he won't know we already know the area, Sam added. And we've prepared it. They had spent the previous night not just hitting drug spots, but also scouting and subtly modifying the terrain around the old mill. Setting up blind spots, reinforcing weak points, establishing communication lines, placing small, non-lethal deterrents. As dusk settled, Arthur and his team moved towards the mill. Thomas from the gas station arrived, offering his old pickup truck and a couple of hunting rifles. Maria from the diner brought food and a nervous, determined energy. A few other townspeople showed up, offering help in small ways, watching roads, providing cover, ready to call for help if needed, though the team primarily intended to handle this themselves to minimize risk to civilians. The community, finally given a spark of hope, was beginning to rally. Rex arrived precisely at midnight, a convoy of 3 black SUVs pulling up to the mill entrance. Rex was a stocky man with sharp eyes and a permanent sneer. He was flanked by his 2 main enforcers and about 8 other heavily armed men. They were cautious, but their arrogance was palpable. They expected a small, desperate group, probably just Arthur and a few older men. Penhaligon. Rex's voice echoed across the abandoned industrial yard. You think you can mess with me? With my business? With my family? The family, likely referring to the mayor and chief he had dirt on. Come out, old man. Bring the deputy's proof. Silence. All right, Rex snarled. Search the place. He's here. His men fanned out, moving cautiously into the darkness of the mill complex. But they weren't moving through an empty ruin, they were entering Arthur's trap. From the shadows, a silent, coordinated takedown began. Javier and Ben used the complex layout to move unseen, disabling men with swift, silent strikes, pressure points, nerve pinches, simple, effective holds. Maria used her knowledge of the structure to guide Silas through collapsed sections, bypassing guards. Sam and Arthur took a more direct approach, moving through the main levels, engaging Rex's men in close quarters. Arthur was a force of nature. He wasn't fast like the younger men, but his movements were economical, precise, devastatingly effective. Every block, every strike, every joint lock was delivered with decades of experience and intent. He moved through the fight like water, flowing around obstacles, overwhelming resistance with minimal effort. He wasn't fighting angry, he was fighting controlled, disciplined. One of Rex's enforcers, a brute named Tank, charged Arthur, swinging a heavy pipe. Arthur sidestepped, his foot hooking Tank's ankle while his hand guided the man's arm past him. Tank stumbled, wide open. Arthur delivered a sharp, focused strike to his solar plexus. Tank folded, gasping, hitting the ground hard. Arthur moved on. Sam, wielding a modified wrench like a club, was a whirlwind of controlled violence, dispatching men with brutal efficiency. Javier and Ben reappeared from the shadows, dragging neutralized opponents into hidden corners. Maria and Silas secured exits and neutralized key points. The sound of fighting was muffled, contained within the mill walls. Rex, standing near the entrance, grew increasingly agitated as reports from his men stopped coming in. He heard sounds of struggle, brief cries, then silence. His face, usually a mask of sneering confidence, twisted with confusion and fear. "What the hell is going on?" he shouted into his radio. Static. Then, from the darkness of the mill entrance, stepped Arthur. He was silhouetted against the faint moonlight filtering through the broken roof, looking somehow larger, more imposing than the unassuming old man from town. He was alone. "Rex," Arthur said, his voice calm, carrying across the yard. "It's over." Rex stared, disbelief warring with rising panic. Where were his men? Who was this old man? "You!" Rex shrieked, pulling out a handgun, pointing it unsteadily at Arthur. "You did this. Where are my guys?" "Secured," Arthur replied. "You should have stayed in the city, Rex. This isn't your territory. You don't understand what real strength is. I'll show you strength." Rex screamed, firing wildly. Arthur moved. He didn't dodge, he flowed, weaving through the trajectory of the bullets, closing the distance with terrifying speed. Rex emptied the clip, rounds tearing into the ground and the mill walls around Arthur, but none finding their mark. Rex fumbled for a new magazine, his hands shaking. Arthur was on him before he could load. He didn't need weapons. He grabbed Rex's wrist, twisted the gun away, sending it skittering across the asphalt. Rex roared, trying to fight, surprisingly strong but utterly untrained. Arthur was a master of applied physics and anatomy. He countered every flailing punch, every wild kick, with minimal force, redirecting energy, applying pressure to joints and nerves. Rex gasped, cried out, his body refusing to obey him. Arthur brought him to his knees with a simple, painful lock, just like he had the mayor's nephew. Rex knelt on the ground, whimpering, defeated not by brute force, but by overwhelming skill and precision. Arthur stood over him, the calm returning to his demeanor, the intensity receding from his eyes. "You thought you could take what wasn't yours," Arthur said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of finality. "You thought you could rule by fear and disrespect. That's not how it works. Respect is earned. Community is built. And some quiet old men have skills you couldn't begin to imagine." His team emerged from the mill, bringing Rex's subdued men with them. They were tied up, disarmed, looking bewildered and beaten. Deputy Peterson arrived shortly after, not alone this time, but with state police investigators he had contacted. With Rex and his men captured, Peterson presented the evidence he had gathered and the leverage Rex had held over the mayor and chief. The chain of corruption was exposed. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of flashing lights and official vehicles. The mill was secured. Rex and his gang were taken into custody. Mayor Thompson and Chief Brody were placed under arrest, their faces ashen with disbelief and defeat. Deputy Peterson, hailed as a hero, stood tall, his integrity intact. Arthur and his team, the Wrenchmen, faded back into the shadows as the professionals took over. They ensured Rex's men were properly secured and evidence was handed over, then quietly slipped away as the sun began to rise, leaving the town to deal with the fallout. Back at his house, Arthur surveyed the damage to his truck and his garden. He felt tired, the ache in his muscles a reminder that even well-honed skills couldn't entirely defy age. But he also felt a profound sense of peace. The job was done. Oakhaven was free from Rex's shadow. Days turned into weeks. The news of the Oakhaven cleanup made national headlines. Mayor Thompson and Chief Brody faced corruption charges. Deputy Peterson was promoted, becoming the interim chief, promising reforms. The teenagers, including Michael Thompson, were given community service and mandatory counseling. Facing the consequences of their actions, and seeing the downfall of the people they had tried to emulate, seemed to shock them into a semblance of reality. One sunny afternoon, a tow truck arrived, taking Arthur's old Ford away. A few days later, a different truck arrived. It wasn't new, but it was a classic, fully restored F-150, same year, same model, but pristine, its blue paint gleaming, no rust, no scratches. Sam and the Wrenchmen had found it, restored it, and delivered it as a gift. Along with the truck came a final message from Mayor Thompson, delivered by a lawyer. The mayor, facing prison time, had been forced to make restitution. It included a formal, written apology to Arthur Penhaligon, signed by the disgraced mayor and his nephew, and a substantial check for damages. Arthur read the apology, a wry smile on his face. An order to apologize. How the world turned. He folded the paper, a symbol of justice, however reluctantly given. The money would help, but the true compensation was the return of peace to Oakhaven. He walked into his garden. The tomato plants were gone, but Thomas and Maria and some of the other townspeople had come by, cleaning up the debris, bringing him new seedlings. The community, fractured by fear, was coming together, rebuilt on a foundation of shared courage and mutual respect. Arthur planted the new tomatoes, his hands in the soil, feeling the simple connection to the earth. His peace was restored, deeper this time, more meaningful because he had fought for it, and helped a whole town fight for its own. The old truck was gone, replaced by a symbol of respect and restoration. The quiet man was still quiet, but everyone in Oakhaven now knew who Arthur Penhaligon truly was. Not just an old man in a beat-up truck, but the quiet guardian who reminded everyone that justice could bloom even in forgotten corners, and that true strength often lay hidden, waiting for the day it was needed most. He had taught a town, and a few arrogant young men, the true cost of disrespect, and the invaluable price of earned peace. Up next you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.